Nuriyah, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm so looking forward to talking with you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Sweating and very hot, but other than that, really good. How are you?
I'm also sweating and hot, so we're in the same boat here. I've got my
Oh,
fan blowing my hair here. I'm so always in awe of and impressed by the courage of women like you, who leave Islam and speak out. It's a very, very dangerous thing to do, as I'm sure you know. I'm interested. I mean, I know you've told this story many times, but I'm interested to hear about your journey with Islam and how you came to leave.
yeah, sure. So, essentially, I was born into a Muslim family, but here in the UK. So it's like your kind of typical conservative to moderate Muslim family, and we follow the Sunni branch of Islam, which is the mainstream kind of biggest branch of Islam to follow. And my parents weren't very religious per se, like they were kind of more what you would now hear in the um, kind of lingo as a cultural Muslim. So they would kind of have it as their identity, but they weren't as religious that they'd pray 5 times a day every single day. But I kind of took on a different sense of the religion because I was very close to my grandfather, and he was an imam, or a kind of the leader of the mosque and the kind of guardian of our local mosque. So he would go there and open it up for the earliest prayers at daybreak, basically at dawn. And he's very respected within the community. And because I'd spent a lot of time with him, he would kind of push me in that direction as well, to give like going to the mosque after school as much importance as school itself. And learning the Quran for me was obviously, if not more important, or if not more important than schoolwork. And I really kind of took Islam seriously from a young age. I started to try and memorize the Quran as much as I could, even though it's all in Arabic, a language we don't understand. It's not my first, second, or third language, but you're supposed to learn the Quran in that. And at the tender age of 9 years old, I decided to wear the hijab because that is what my Quran teacher in the mosque said that, good young Muslim girls do. And 9 is the kind of age where things in Islam start to get a lot more serious for you if you're a little girl. And so I thought, if this is what God wants from me, then I'm going to do it. And I do want to go to heaven. So I'm going to play by his rules. And I was actually shocked. It was I was the anomaly. Usually you see a lot of people in Islam who carry on wearing hijab in their elder years. They have been forced to at some level from when they were younger. There is definitely a kind of pressure behind closed doors. It's like psychological manipulation or kind of emotional pressure, blackmail. But for me, in my case, it was all me. It came honestly from inside me, and it was my kind of conviction. And I was slightly weirded out that nobody around me, none of the other women in my family, wanted to clearly not go to heaven. And why aren't they wearing it? So that's how seriously I would take it. Like, even in school, I would kind of do demonstrations for how you do the Islamic prayer. We have a class called Religious Education in the UK, RE, and I would always put my hands up and kind of represent Muslims wherever I could. And then it was when I moved to the Middle East. So I spent most of my childhood, after 9, in Saudi Arabia, which is the land of Islam, if you will. So I was very privileged to kind of be living in the house of God according to Islam, and not many Muslims get to live so close to Mecca, which is where people go and do the holy pilgrimage once in their lives if you can. Some people go more than that, but you're only obligated to go once. So we could essentially go every other weekend, and that's considered like a massive blessing in Islam. People spend their entire life savings on something that I could just put my black abaya on, leave the house, and go and do whenever I wanted and get. It's called sawab, but it's like more and more rewards to go to heaven. So as a young mind, I was very like close to the house of God. I would go there a lot, but then as I got more and more immersed in like my international school, I came across people from different religions as well, and that was starting to open my mind a bit more than it had been in London, where I was not that exposed to that much of an international crowd surprisingly. So I started to see elements of what life was like outside of the compound I lived in. The compound was like a mini America. We lived really close to Aramco. And so in the compound, women can drive, you can wear what you want. There's like the actual laws of Saudi Arabia are suspended. But then outside of the compound in the school, it's like you have to cover up. You can't be free mixing with the opposite gender. You cannot drive. You can't go anywhere without kind of a male escort. And he has to be related to you. All of these kind of rules applied. And then there were some darker things that I would see, like on Friday after the prayers, they would hold amputations and beheadings, and they would call out the crimes for people. So my young mind was like processing all of that, even though I completely stayed religious. But yeah, it was a weird kind of understanding that was given to me that this is a very extreme version of Islam, which is called Wahhabi Islam, which is what the Saudis practice, and this isn't what we do. That's kind of what like my elders and my parents would tell me when I would question things. And then eventually, when I was about 16, we moved to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And that's where I saw a really more like chilled out, lax version of Dubai where, the cinemas aren't banned like in Saudi Arabia. You don't have to watch pirated movies. You're allowed to like go on dates, not necessarily call them dates, but you can learn to drive and you can do more normal things that like, teenagers want to do. So that's what I thought was like, oh, this is the perfect Islam for me. This matches up with my principles a bit more. Even though there were still those kind of critical questions in the back of your mind that God tells you shouldn't be openly friends with Christians and Jews, or you shouldn't be okay that with the fact that people are gay. So those kind of things would linger in my mind. But that's kind of my exposure to Islam until I was a young adult, basically.
What were the amputations and the beheadings for? What were the crimes people were being punished for?
So in Saudi Arabia, like it varies. For example, if you steal something and you get caught, the hand that you steal with gets chopped off. Um, and like it goes up and up and up on the scale. So if you get caught sometimes for drug offenses, it can lead to execution. Um, and then there's various things. So like if you steal once, you get one hand chopped off. If you steal again, you get the second hand chopped off. And there's the penal code is pretty bizarre.
And so what sort of woke you up, I suppose, to the realities of Islam to the point that you decided to abandon the religion?
So as I said, I was kind of like dabbling in this fluffy Islam that I
Yeah.
saw in Dubai, and then I came back to the UK for university, and again I studied like a module of Islamic law, which got some of my kind of, hairs being raised as to what is this, but I still wholeheartedly defended it. And those were like things specifically to do with women, the fact that women get less inheritance and the fact that men can divorce women. And it says in the Quran that like men are a degree above women. Um, but I was still okay with it because I still kind of internalized that I don't know, there must be some divine reason for all of that. It wasn't until as an adult myself, I moved back to Dubai and I was in a really bad marriage that I wanted to get out of. And that's when I thought that I could rely on the normal processes of courts and, saying that this is something that I no longer feel safe in and I'd like to apply for a divorce. And that's when the full throttle kind of hammer of Sharia, which is Islamic law, came down on me because just the fact that you're a Muslim in Dubai, Sharia law applies to you regardless. So even though I was like a British citizen, you can't really choose what law to apply to you. Other people can, but if you're Muslim, they must treat you under Sharia law. And so my ex-husband, he would refuse. He would not like give me the divorce willingly. So he refused to, and he found a lawyer who picked out this really archaic law that's derived directly from the Quran, which essentially had the police call me and tell me that I had to go back to his house and be forced to stay there. And I just can't leave that house without his permission moving forward. So to my kind of Western trained mind, that seemed redonkulous. Like I was like, how is this even a thing? And how is this a thing that a judge would sanction? But it turns out that it absolutely was. So instead of hearing my case out for like these levels of abuse, things that I just realized I was experiencing, they would completely flip the narrative and say things like I was possessed by demons and I had to pray 5 times a day and get closer to God. And essentially, they were going to trap me in my marital home with this man who I did not feel safe around. And that's when I kind of had to flee for my life, because I refused to hand over my passport for them to just, kind of do what they wanted with me. And at the last minute, I called the British helpline for like emergency expats in Dubai. And they just told me, like, don't give your passport and do not surrender it, because we've heard horror stories of how they treat British expats in the UAE over the tiniest of things, which just make no sense. So, yeah, by the skin of my teeth, I kind of got on a plane out of there, packed a bag, just left, hours before they were going to put a travel ban on me. And it wasn't until like things had calmed down back in London and I was kind of in the thick of this PTSD from police sirens and everything I'd experienced in the UAE, of them trying to track me down constantly, and the harassment and the stalking, that I actually realized I have access to an open web now. Like in my whole time in Saudi Arabia and Dubai, the internet is always kind of monitored. You're not allowed to access sites like about Islam. You could get in trouble if they add that to your list of crimes. So for the first time in my life, I got back to the UK when I was safe enough, and I Googled, is Islam the truth? And that's kind of where it all started to unravel for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, presumably most Islamic women are born into the faith, but there are also women who choose it, as adults to convert. Why?
That's a great question. And I genuinely wonder the same thing. Like, I'm like, if I wasn't born into this and I was, grown and someone came to me and they gave me this set of ideas or these promises that Islam offers, I would like to think there is absolutely no way I would ever sign up for this. But um, there's a number of reasons that I've come across, and obviously they really know how to like kind of go in and prey on people who are very vulnerable or going through something in their lives, for example, just like kind of any cult does, really. But if you're having some kind of, personal crisis or some kind of identity crisis, and especially Islam's favorite is that if you think that, the Western world has its flaws, and that this society is not serving you, they really like to play on that, because they offer you a worldview that's like the antithesis of the Western world, for example, and they actually flip the narrative so manipulatively, where they tell you our women are covered up because we treat them like queens, and look at Western women, they're kind of all there and having to be naked and parade themselves around to be seen. And they really play on these weird stereotypes and the downfall of the West because of high divorce rates and the breakdown of nuclear marriages. And I mean, look at Islam, it allows 4 marriages, for goodness sakes, and men to get divorced and women to cover up. But genuinely, some women are actually tempted by, and they're lured in by this false sense of, we're going to be treated like queens in this religion, and Eastern men may hold the promise that Western society couldn't give me.
Yeah. There's this strange aspect that I did not learn about recently, which sounds like, to me, it sounds like husbands can essentially accuse their wives of thought crime, intent to disobey kind of thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that's actually the law that was put on me, the ancient law. It's called da azawjiyya in Arabic, and it actually relates to the disobedience of the wife. And the disobedience in Arabic is called nushuz, and this comes directly from the Quran verse, Surah 434, which is also the wife beating verse, because it says, if you fear disobedience from your wife, you may admonish her, separate your beds, and then finally beat her. But the whole concept is, if you merely fear disobedience, not even that something has to necessarily have taken place, but you could just be a very paranoid, insecure, jealous husband.
Yeah. The whole thing is just is wild to me, but even wilder is that the West, progressives specifically, the left in the West, seems to have begun to really embrace Islam, which is, it's strange for a number of reasons, and it's also scary. It's also disturbing. But for the so-called side of the political spectrum that claims to be most invested in defending the oppressed and the marginalized, to defend, to embrace, to protect a religion that is so oppressive makes no sense. I mean, what can we make of this, recent rallying around in defense of Islam in the West? A religion again that's opposed to gay rights, women's rights, democracy. How did we get here?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a very I think it makes a lot of sense when they call it like this unholy alliance, because at the end of the day, everything that the progressive left, or the once progressive left, but they claim to stand for, Islam goes against the very, fundamentals of so many of those rights. Yet they like to cozy up to each other, and we're seeing that in the West, and we actually historically saw it happen during the Iranian Revolution. And like, if we learn anything from history, we should learn from that, because the very moment that power is with the Islamists, they will turn on all of these kind of, the entire left that will once prop them up. So that's generally why it is very unholy in its alliance. But it's kind of like this mad partnership alliance of, my enemy's enemy is my friend, because they have this deep rooted hatred for Western society as it is, and to kind of be proud of Western values and general actual proper liberal values that they should be defending. And this kind of breakdown of families and the breakdown of society as we know it. Islam promises you their glorified worldview, and their left has their own agenda, and it's very convenient at the moment, this kind of marriage of convenience that they've started. But I don't know if it's like to this level in the US, but in the UK, it's turning into a very dangerous scene politically, because we're seeing the glorification of literal terrorism. We're seeing such a huge rise in things like anti-Semitism, which is found in the bedrock of Islam. Like, I think if you're a good Muslim, based on the scripture, you are supposed to be extremely anti-Semitic. And now we see people here on the far left actually chanting things that, you'd be sickened to hear in being sounded in Europe again. We just had a music festival, one of the largest, which is one of the proud British institutions. It used to be, anyway, Glastonbury. And this rapper came on stage and he was chanting death to the IDF and to go and kill your MPs and anybody who does not glorify Islam and sit on that side of the spectrum. As you mentioned, they automatically deem as like far right. Far right racists, far right thugs, and they would say they call people like myself that, people who have just come from within the faith itself. And I'm talking about it. Yeah, I'm also apparently a far right white supremacist racist thug because I call out Islam. But I think, yeah, we really need to learn from history's examples, because Islam and Islamists are never your friend, no matter how much they cozy up to one another at the moment.
No, and I mean, as I understand it, the aim is to destroy the West.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think, where they converge. They have like this more universal, I guess, agenda. And with Islam, it is to unite the Ummah, so like the global Muslims, under one banner, one army, if you will, because they're in a perpetual state of war with the West. They need it to go from all these infidel lands like Canada, like the UK, like the US, like Australia, the West in general. They are constantly at war with them to turn them into majority Islamic nations where, all the infidels and everyone else is subjugated under them. And with the leftists, you see like the kind of this globalist agenda where there's a border-free world and there's no such thing as anybody who's nationalistic, and it's wrong to defend your country. And they'd like to see the breakdown of the family unit and the breakdown of kind of what we hold to be let's say, even like biological facts and truth. Um, and that's where they don't realize when they say like gays for Gaza, they don't realize what actually happens to gays in Gaza.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's another aspect of this that I think that there's so many leftists and progressives who really just don't understand. I mean, we could paint it all as evil, and I think that the result may well be kind of evil. But I think that a lot of people who are saying free Palestine, who are at the pro Hamas rallies or supporting them, I think they genuinely believe that they're opposing a so called genocide, and that they're protecting a population that's under attack by Israel. But when you look at the rallies, I mean, they really do seem like hate rallies, and they are absolutely about, hating and destroying the West, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and like, I mean, maybe I'm sure in their heart of hearts they think they're, doing the right thing and they're on the right side of history, but um, they've been fed this kind of very, I guess, propagandist way of looking at the world, where it's like oppressor and oppressed situation, and they apply that to every kind of conflict around the world, and that's why they can't really see the nuances about when you support, like when Gays for Gaza, or we welcome refugees from all of these countries that are genuinely out there to come and break down your country. You might be doing it with the best of intentions, but you have been deliberately fed this version of history so that you kind of are on the streets saying these things. For example, we talk about the UK, and the institutions are captured with this kind of mindset where even our top universities, they're teaching in relation to organizations, terrorist organizations like Hamas. They literally teach the students, well, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. Um, and they genuinely cannot differentiate like actual history for what it is versus just the narrative that they're fed, because it needs to feed into, oh, white people bad,
Mhm.
colonialism bad, just the most recent form of colonialism. I mean, that's why I always like to call it out and say, well, what about Islamic colonialism? That the entire ideology of Islam is built on Arab imperialism. What happened to all of those religions in the Middle East, which are now minorities? The Coptic Christians of Egypt, the Jews of Yemen. There's barely any left. Yet they just choose to be blinded to that side of history because it doesn't fit their narrative of the West is bad, Israel is bad, and we need to always side with, these marginalized, victimized brown people of the East.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, anyone who criticizes Islam, or, as we saw this happen with these rape gangs in the UK, the Pakistani rape gangs, the grooming gangs, as they've been called. For years and years and years, these girls were being raped and abused and trafficked, and it wasn't addressed. It was ignored by the authorities, by the media, out of fear of being called Islamophobic, of fear of being called racist. And, Islam is racist as well. Racism is actually quite ubiquitous. People, these white leftists in the West tend to think that this only goes in one direction, and it's white against brown or black or whatever it is. And that's just not the case around the world. Um, what is the truth about racism and Islam?
Well, I mean, you're right. It absolutely is racist if they were to kind of look into the way Islam has historically treated other races, but the scriptures as well. I mean, it really kind of uh, breaks my heart a little bit when I see, especially like black people following Islam, because the actual term for black people in Islam comes from the word slave in Arabic, and there's still areas um, in Israel and in Palestine that have those areas where Black people are known to be called, Abd, like that area. And so the word is directly derived from the way they used to be called in Islam when they were actually trading these slaves, because prior to the transatlantic slave trade, there was the Arab slave trade, which lasted for a lot longer. And was, it involved taking many, many Africans from the Horn of Africa, all the way through Tanzania. And places like Zanzibar were known as really like hotbeds of trading these kind of men. And what they would do to those men would be to castrate them, so that they wouldn't interfere with their women. And obviously the women they would take as sex slaves or for domestic servitude. And then they've also got slave raids into um, the Balkans in Europe, and that's where Slav, the original word, comes from as well, for Slavic, because they had like this desire to take women from there, and they would do raids into their villages. And that's why if you look at something like the Ottoman Empire, the harems of the sultans of the Ottoman Empire mostly comprised of women, not of like Turkic origin or from around there or from Arab countries, because they leave their women alone. So Muslim women are given more respect and given more dignity, but non-Muslim women, so example, you can go and completely like rape and pillage your way through Eastern Europe, if you will, and those kind of areas, and bring them back to Muslim lands, and then do what you will with them and have them produce your heirs and all of that. But you will never get married to them, you will never do anything like that, because those positions are reserved for Muslim women only. That's why you have like breakaway stories in history where a slave woman of European descent rose up into like the title of like the queen in the Ottoman Empire, when Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent was the ruler, because that's so few and far between. That mindset of Muslim women are pure and dignified and we respect them and we protect them, versus non-Muslim women who we can completely have our way with and will happily take as sex slaves, or who our right hand possess from the Quran in the middle of war as booty, very much applies. And that goes all the way to what we're seeing in the UK with the rape gang scandals of these white young girls. It's that same mentality, which is found directly in the Quran. So there's racism, there's anti-Semitism, there's bigotry, because anybody that's not a Muslim in general, so they talk about Christians and Jews, in this way a lot, that they're the worst of creatures. They're like the scum of the earth. They've been shown the truth and yet they disbelieve. So Christians, Jews, Black people, and non-Muslim women, all in there, absolutely hated. And then also the biggest sin in Islam is to commit shirk, which is associating partners with God. And so Islam views every single polytheist and pagan as guilty of this. So then Hindus automatically fall under this category as well. And like I said, any polytheist and pagan. So the superiority complex is very much there.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you explained all that. I want to get back to this. His name was Bob Vilan, is that right? Who you mentioned earlier, who was chanting death to the IDF at Glastonbury recently.
Yeah.
He and his band were planning to go on tour in the US, and the US just revoked their visas ahead of the tour. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I saw that the other day, and I was very, very glad that the US had decided to take that step against him, because I mean, it was jarring the fact that it even got to the level that it did in the UK, because we do expect that, all these musicians that come on, there is some kind of background agreement and understanding of what their set will entail. And I know obviously Glastonbury's always had a bit of political protest kind of a dimension added to it, but the way that he went there and kind of spouted this absolute hate, followed by other acts as well, saying go and kill your member of parliament. When we've had member of parliaments actually die in the UK, 2 of them at the hands of Islamists. I think we need to send a very, very strong message. And I think the United States has done the correct thing here with I think it, free speech has its place, and then it kind of goes on to an incitement of hate and violence, and I think he's definitely crossed that line there.
I mean, it's funny to me because over the past, decade in particular, the left has tried to frame a lot as hate speech, and a lot of really kind of silly stuff, and a lot of, biological truths and realities as hate speech. Yeah. And, I'm a free speech absolutist, but the line is at incitement of violence, specific incitement of violence or genocide. And it does seem like what Bob Dylan was chanting. I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name right, but
yeah, no,
right.
I think it's a play on Bob Dylan, who I think he thinks
villain.
He wanted, yeah. I know,
oh, Lord.
Ridiculous.
That's awfully flattering to himself, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that it's a clear incitement to violence. I mean, you can't really get around that. I want to talk a bit about what's happened in the UK on account of mass immigration. One of the results of mass immigration has been what you've described as Muslim ghettos or de facto no-go zones. What do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, so what I mean when I say that is the fact that I guess for the last 20 odd years now, I would say that this kind of multicultural project that the UK was undertaking has failed to such a large degree, because we have got, for example, somebody like me in 2025 Britain, I know I say what I say, and Islam is, it comes with the death penalty for if you leave it. But theoretically, I'm in a country where, as of now, could change very soon because they're trying to pass an Islamophobia bill where this conversation would land me potentially in prison. But you would think theoretically I can go about my life saying what I say and, living a safe, comfortable life. Yet there are parts of the UK which they have been kind of overtaken by a constant swarm and stream of immigration from one particular demographic. And then obviously the services have built up around that. For example, let's say if you've got Muslims coming in from certain countries, then many other Muslims come and settle there, and then you get the halal meat shops opening up, you get the mosques being built, you get the Islamic schools, you get the madrasas, and then lo and behold, you need a Sharia council because you want to be consulted on family and civil matters in the Islamic context. You don't care about British law anymore. And now you've got your mosque blaring from the loudspeakers, and now suddenly the white people in the area feel uncomfortable and have started slowly moving out, which we call white flight, which has happened in a city like Luton, for example, where a lot of kind of these activists come from. It's where, Tommy Robinson started his activism from, because he saw the rate of change. But for example, I would not be walking around Luton after the things that I've said. I wouldn't be walking around many towns up north, because they effectively are considered so dominated by that demographic that even the police kind of let the whatever's going on in terms of the crime and stuff, they don't get as involved and they don't step in because of the fear of backlash. I mean, these people now have their own mini internal policing situations going on, and it's just extremely unsafe. I mean, it's unsafe for women, it's unsafe obviously non-Muslim women and women like myself, but it's also unsafe for the majority of people, because they've turned it into an enclave. And you see so many of those. If you just even look at the demographic of London and the rate of change, statistically over the years, it's seriously alarming. And so people actually joke about it or say it as a tongue-in-cheek comment that only the countryside is still safe in the UK, and that's where you got to go if you want to escape this. And even then, it's how long will that be safe for? Because with the constant rate of migration, I think today there was another 2,000 people that came over on boats, small boats today. Every morning I wake up and the news is more small boat crossings. Now I think today, under Keir Starmer, the record was broken for the amount of migrants that have come over into the port of Dover. And it's just now these people are having to be housed in those countryside areas. So now even in sleepy villages where they weren't used to these, new demographics as an influx, now you're seeing asylum hotels prop up next to like, a 200-year-old pub, that was their main focal point of their village. And now you're having to deal with, as a woman walking home late at night and coming across men from these cultures who have never seen women out at that time, having a few drinks openly, because it's just not something you do in their culture.
Without a head covering or veil or anything on.
And a
In their
chaperone
Western
from their
family.
family. And yeah.
Yeah, it's really scary. I mean, what would you recommend? It seems like things are pretty far gone in the UK and in other places in Europe as well. But I mean, how could this be addressed by politicians in an illegal sense in the UK to stop, Western civilization from being destroyed?
Yeah, no, I know it's obviously like, there needs to be like, this has to be the turning point, I think, for the UK
Yeah.
and like Europe in the wider sense, especially. But we've got to get very, very serious when it comes to, Islam. Like I'm saying, with we've got a very left wing party in charge right now, and they're just kind of taking us further and further down this rabbit hole where if I even state a truth about Islam, like Islam was spread by the sword, that could get me deemed Islamophobic or racist, which is ridiculous. But it goes back to what you were saying earlier about this is how they're trying to use their hate speech, to essentially silence people from any kind of speech that doesn't agree with theirs. So I think we need to get very, very strict with protecting like actual liberal values that the West was kind of built on. We need to take examples from various countries where things have worked. So, for example, France got a lot more serious with the type of Islamic influences they were allowing into the country, making sure that every sermon that's being said in the mosque is in the French language, not in Arabic, so they understand what's going on. They have recordings of the intentions of these people to kind of slash this whole DEI agenda where you're allowing essentially so many, like foreign or like, people from foreign cultures to lead the way in so many important institutions. I think we've got to cut back on that massively. And then you've got to take like even the Danish example where they've had to force assimilation. So when you've got this influx of people coming in, you cannot let them get to the situation where they've built up an enclave and that city is no longer recognizable. You've got to make sure that the monoculture remains yours and you retain that. And obviously you can have flavors of other cultures, but there has to be a dominant monoculture, and it shouldn't be a crime to be proud of that, because clearly that's why they fled that country to come here. But also just sheerly to stop the number of migrants coming over, there has to be like an actual pause so you can stop and assess the situation. I think we need to get a lot more tough on that, and how easily you give out visas to people. Also, we've got issues here with the ECHR. We need to probably leave that because it makes it very difficult to deport people, even if they're guilty of crimes here, if they've got familial ties and things like that. But honestly, Megan, we've had the most ridiculous judgments be passed down where, for example, someone guilty of a sexual offense doesn't need to be deported because the judge says their child won't find the same chicken nuggets back in their country of origin. Literally to that degree. So this is, when I say institutions are captured, this is how captured they are. So a lot of things need to be undone.
As someone who speaks out against Islam, do you fear for your life? Do you fear for your safety?
Yes, of course. I do, and I thought it would get better, obviously, as time went on. But given the current state of this country and the way the politicians are appeasing Islam more and more, I feel like the pandering is to Islam and to protect this religion more than it is for people like me who have every right in a free democratic country to criticize the religion. They're trying to legally muzzle people like me and say, actually, it's essentially backdoor blasphemy laws that they're trying to instill in the UK. So I'm feeling more and more unsafe with every passing day. And as I mentioned to you, I'm always kind of watching my back, and I know which areas to never ever even accidentally rock up in, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your courage. It's so important. There's so many people in the West and in the world in general who really need to hear this message and to really understand what's going on and how serious it is, because it is really serious. It's not to be taken lightly at all. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you so much, and for having this conversation, because many people wouldn't even, touch it, but you went straight in and asked all the important questions, and I think it's the need of the hour. All of these kind of, currently still free Western countries need to look to each other and contain this while we can. So yeah, I really appreciate it, Megan.
Can you let us know where people can find you online and support your work?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on YouTube with my full name, Nuriyah Khan, also Holy Humanist. Type any of them and it should come up. On there, I post my own videos trying to expose Islam and show how bad it is for women across the board, specifically as well with what's going on in the UK these days. And I'm also on X. I think it's at Nuriyah K. And on Instagram at Nuriyah K21, but there's no activism there. It's just fun.
Okay, great. I'll obviously link to those in the show notes. And yeah, thank you again. It was really great to talk with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Take care.